Celia Summers, the airline clerk repeated with a frown, flipping through the stack of travel documents again. I'm sorry, but if you don't have your passport, we can't let you board. Celia's heart dropped. No, I had it. I swear I had it. She yanked open the zipper of her suitcase, rifling through layers of rolled-up clothes, sandals, a worn paperback she hadn't even touched during her trip. Her hands were trembling now. This couldn't be happening. Her flight back to New York was in less than an hour, and she couldn't afford to miss it. Her boss at the gallery had already given her side eye for even asking for the time off. I just had it, she whispered, trying to retrace her steps. Her last stop was that cafe near the beach she'd sat on the patio, drinking a watery iced coffee and journaling in the sun. Then she'd taken a cab straight to the airport, unless, oh God, the cab. Celia's stomach turned. She must have left it there. No cab receipt, no license plate. Just a vague memory of the driver humming along to some Spanish ballad while the ocean breeze whipped through the open windows. The clerk was already turning to the next person in line. Celia backed away from the counter, defeated, dragging her suitcase behind her like a dead limb. She sank into a bench near the terminal window, buried her face in her hands, and let out a long, frustrated groan. What now? She didn't notice the man studying the small navy booklet in his hand a few terminals away, or how he paused when he saw the name on it. Or the way his gaze slowly shifted to her as if something had clicked. He was tall, dressed in a dark, crisp shirt and tailored slacks, phone in one hand, the passport in the other. His driver stood nearby, holding a sleek leather duffel. The man didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," he said as he approached her. His voice was deep, smooth, with the kind of natural authority that made people turn. "Did you lose this?" Celia looked up, eyes wide. Her heart jumped. There it was, her passport, worn edges. The little scratch on the corner from a trip to Rome 2 years ago. "Oh my God, yes," she gasped, standing up so fast she nearly tripped over her suitcase. She grabbed it from him, flipping it open. Her picture. Her name, her ticket home. She looked up at him, blinking. "Where did you find it?" "In the backseat of a cab I just took," he said with a small nod. "Driver was about to toss it, but I convinced him to let me take a look. You're lucky I checked." Celia laughed, half in relief, half in disbelief. "Lucky? You just saved my life." His mouth twitched into something resembling a smile. "I guess that makes me your hero for the day." "I'm Celia," she said, sticking out her hand, still a little breathless. "Lachlan Kane," he replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, warm. "Nice to meet you, Celia Summers." She caught something in his eyes, then he was looking at her like he already knew her, like he wasn't just handing her a passport, but stepping into something bigger. "You still have time to make your flight," he added, glancing at the clock above them. She nodded, suddenly flustered. "Right, yeah, I should go, thank you, really." He hesitated. "Where are you headed?" "New York," she said. "Home," he nodded slowly. "I'm headed there too," something about the way he said it, like it meant more than just geography. Celia gave him a grateful smile, then darted back toward the gate, heart pounding. She didn't even glance back. 2 days later, she saw him again. She was walking out of the gallery where she worked in Soho, arms full of foam boards and pressed prints for an upcoming exhibit, when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. She didn't think anything of it. This was New York, after all, until the window glided down. "Need a hand?" Lachlan asked casually from the back seat. Celia nearly dropped everything. "You again," she laughed. "Fate keeps shoving us together," he said, stepping out of the car and taking the stack from her arms like it weighed nothing. "Where to?" she blinked. "You don't have to, I insist." He was already matching her stride, carrying the boards like he belonged there, like he wasn't wearing a watch that probably cost more than her rent. "You work here?" he asked, nodding toward the gallery. "Yeah." "Assistant curator." She paused, then added, "Which is just a fancy way of saying I do everything and get paid next to nothing." He chuckled. "Sounds familiar." "Oh, you're in art." "Not exactly," he said. "I own a few galleries." "Among other things." The way he said it was vague, but not in a shady way, more like he had too many businesses to list and didn't want to sound like he was bragging. She tilted her head. "Like, a collector, sometimes, investor, mostly." He didn't elaborate and she didn't push. But when they stepped into the gallery and the owner saw him, her jaw dropped. Mr. Kane, she said breathlessly. We didn't expect, just helping a friend, he said smoothly, setting the boards down on the table. Celia's boss looked between them, her eyes practically bulging. Wait, Celia whispered later when they were alone. You're that Kane, he gave her a look that said guilty. As in Kane Holdings, Kane Hotels, Kane freaking Aviation, guilty again. Celia stared. You're a billionaire. He leaned against the edge of her desk, watching her with something unreadable in his eyes. That a problem? She opened and closed her mouth. I know, I just wasn't expecting it. Most people don't expect the guy who finds their passport in a cab to be on Forbes' list, he said lightly. She laughed, a little stunned. Definitely not, he straightened, that same quiet intensity in his expression. Dinner, she blinked. What? Tonight? Let me take you to dinner. Lachlan, I'm not used to this, he stepped closer. It's just dinner, but it wasn't. She could feel it already. It was the start of something, and for some reason, she didn't want to say no. That night, she walked into Delmare, a candlelit rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline in the only decent dress she owned. When Lachlan stood to greet her, dressed in a sharp navy suit, she felt her knees go weak. He pulled out her chair. He didn't look at his phone once. He asked about her art, her dreams, her childhood in Oregon. He listened. And when dessert came some rich chocolate thing she couldn't pronounce, he leaned in and said softly, I haven't stopped thinking about you since the airport. She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Lachlan. I know this is fast, he said, but I don't care. Her heart was beating too loud to think straight. I want to see where this goes, he said. I want to know everything about you. She set the spoon down slowly. You don't even know if I snore. Do you? Maybe, he smiled, eyes warm. I'm willing to risk it. And just like that, just days after losing her passport, Celia realized she might be finding something far more unexpected. She might be falling for the man who found it. Celia stood in front of the mirror in her tiny apartment, gripping the edge of the sink as water dripped from the faucet behind her. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the candle she'd lit an hour ago, trying to calm her nerves after last night's dinner. She hadn't planned on seeing Lachlan again so soon, but when he called the gallery that morning and asked if she was free that evening, she hadn't hesitated. She said yes, before she could talk herself out of it. Before she could remind herself that men like him didn't orbit the same world as women like her. And yet, here she was. The doorbell rang. She padded barefoot across the worn hardwood floor, heart rising into her throat. She half expected a driver. Instead, Lachlan stood there himself, one hand resting casually in the pocket of a charcoal coat. You live on the 4th floor? He asked, glancing past her at the narrow staircase. She nodded. Elevator's been broken since last winter. He gave a quick, thoughtful nod, then looked at her again. You ready? She hesitated. Where are we going? You'll see. The car waiting outside wasn't anything like the ones that usually prowled her neighborhood. It gleamed beneath the street lamp, black as night, with a driver who opened the door the moment he saw them approach. Lachlan didn't say a word as she slid inside. He simply rested his hand near hers, not quite touching, but close enough that her skin prickled with awareness. They drove for 12 minutes in silence, not an awkward silence, something else. As if he was letting her settle into the idea of being near him again. When the car stopped, Celia frowned. The west side. Lachlan gestured toward the building across the street, a long stone structure with ivy curling up its walls and a wide, arched entrance glowing with warm amber light. The museum's closed, she said slowly. Not for us. He stepped out and offered his hand. As she took it, the security guard at the door gave a small nod and buzzed them in. The silence inside was almost wholly no crowds, no murmured conversations, just the soft echo of their footsteps against marble floors. I asked for after hours access, he said as they walked past a towering sculpture of twisted bronze. I thought you might like to see the new Rothko exhibit without a crowd in the way. She stared at him. You did this for me, he looked at her sideways. You said you missed the opening. That was 2 months ago. I remember. She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever listened to her that closely, let alone arranged something like this. As they entered the central gallery, the lights dimmed gradually, illuminating each painting in soft, golden halos. Deep reds, burnt oranges, and haunting expanses of black surrounded them. Celia moved slowly, reverent. She felt his eyes on her as she stopped in front of a massive canvas and tilted her head. "Do you ever feel like these are saying something no one else knows how to hear?" she asked quietly. Lachlan stepped beside her. "All the time." She turned toward him, surprised. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he looked at the painting again, as if it had told him a secret he wasn't ready to share. They lingered for almost an hour, wandering through the hush of the museum. When they stepped back out into the crisp night air, Celia was glowing. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so seen. As the car pulled away from the curb, she turned to him. "You didn't need to go to all that trouble." "I didn't," he said simply. "I wanted to." She studied him. "Why?" He didn't look away. "Because I'm not interested in pretending this is casual." The words hit her like a chord, deep and vibrating. She folded her hands in her lap. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to want to," he said. The car turned down a side street, then pulled to a stop in front of a tall building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman in a navy coat. "I need to show you something," Lachlan said. She hesitated. "Upstairs," he nodded. "Not what you think." Curiosity got the better of her. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. The lights were low, revealing a cavernous space of smooth concrete, glass, and steel, but it wasn't cold, not like she expected. The floors were warm walnut, the furnishings minimalist but rich with texture. A fireplace crackled quietly in the distance. "This is your place?" she asked. "One of them." He led her down a hallway lined with art pieces she recognized instantly from magazines and gallery catalogs. Some were contemporary, others older, rarer. He stopped in front of a tall wooden door, then unlocked it. Inside was a studio. No, an artist's studio. Tall windows stretched across the far wall. A canvas stood in the center, half-painted. Shelves lined with brushes, jars of pigment, and sketchbooks filled the room. It smelled faintly of turpentine and charcoal. Celia stared. "You paint?" He nodded once. "Not often. Not well." She stepped closer to the canvas. It was abstract, chaotic, layered, something raw and unfinished. "This is beautiful." He walked to the opposite side of the room and opened a small drawer. From it, he pulled a thin leather-bound portfolio. He held it out. She opened it and froze. Sketches, dozens of them, all of her, different angles, different expressions, some laughing, some deep in thought. One showed her at the museum, standing in front of the Rothko she'd just admired. "How?" she asked. Lachlan's voice was low. "I've been drawing you since the airport." Her breath caught. "But I didn't even." You smiled at the clerk after he turned you away. "I don't know why that stuck with me, but it did." She traced one of the sketches with her finger. "This is insane." "I know." Celia looked up at him. "You barely know me." "I want to." "Why?" He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Because when I'm around you, I remember the parts of life I forgot how to feel." Her chest tightened. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening slightly. "I have to take this," he said. "Stay as long as you like. The driver can take you home whenever you're ready." She nodded, still clutching the sketchbook. He stepped out, leaving her alone in the space that somehow felt more intimate than anything they'd shared yet. She turned back to the artwork. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. But part of her didn't want to run. Part of her wanted to dive in. She wandered through the studio, discovering more sketches tucked in corners, under paint-streaked rags, even pinned behind the easel. He'd been drawing her long before she knew he'd remembered her name. She didn't know what scared her more, that he saw her so clearly, or that she already wanted him to. She found her way to the balcony. The city stretched below, glittering and alive. She stood there, gripping the cool railing, heart thudding. Behind her, the phone call ended. She didn't turn around until she felt his presence beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just trying to catch my breath." He was quiet for a long moment. "I should have asked before showing you those." "No," she said quickly. "I'm glad you did." He looked at her and something shifted in his expression. "I don't do this often. I'd be surprised if you did. I mean it. This," he gestured between them, "isn't how I usually live." She believed him. "I don't know what this is yet," she admitted. "But I want to find out." His hand brushed hers. "Then let's find out together." She didn't pull away, didn't look down. The city roared beneath them, but in that moment, all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the soft, impossible truth that she was already falling. Celia gripped the edge of the marble sink in the gallery's employees' only bathroom, her pulse still racing from the morning's chaos. Her boss had shown up unannounced with a surprise visit from a European artist who barely spoke English and demanded a customized exhibit layout by noon. Celia had handled it barely, but now her nerves were frayed, and her hair had come loose from the low bun she'd haphazardly attempted before rushing out that morning. She splashed cold water on her face and exhaled slowly. She needed to breathe. She needed to stop thinking about Lachlan Kane. Except it was impossible, because every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the heat of him beside her, hear the way he said her name like it tasted better than the wine they'd shared on his penthouse balcony. She hadn't seen him in 3 days, not since the night he'd shown her the studio, and part of her had started wondering if she'd imagined the whole thing. Then she stepped out of the gallery's side door to take a frantic call from the caterer and saw the delivery van. A man in a brown apron was unloading what looked like an entire garden: pale pink orchids, white tulips, bleeding heart vines draping from silver urns. She paused, eyebrows drawn. "Excuse me," she asked, stepping toward him. "Are those for an event here?" "Delivery for Celia Summers," the man said, checking his clipboard. "From Ledalia." Her stomach turned over. Ledalia was one of Manhattan's most exclusive floral ateliers. Their arrangements were usually reserved for royal weddings or Fashion Week galas, not assistant curators in scuffed sneakers. "Are you sure?" she asked. He waved her over. "There's a note." She pulled the card from the envelope tucked into the bouquet space. It was simple. Just her name and a time, 8 o'clock. No signature. Her phone buzzed 10 minutes later. A message from an unknown number, where something that makes you feel like you. She stared, heart thudding. At precisely 8, a town car pulled up outside her building. She climbed in without hesitation, her pulse steady and sure in a way that surprised her. She wore a soft, dark blue dress that she usually reserved for gallery openings, the one she always thought made her look like she belonged in the room even when she didn't feel it. The car pulled into a narrow, private drive lined with lanterns. It wasn't a restaurant, not a hotel. The driver opened the door and gestured toward an iron gate tucked between 2 stone columns. She stepped through it. At the end of the path, Lachlan stood beneath a canopy of golden lights strung through the trees. A long table was set for 2 beneath the branches, adorned with crystal glasses and silver flatware. Soft, classical music drifted from a hidden speaker. "You did all this?" she asked, stepping toward him. He watched her with an expression she hadn't seen before, something quiet, almost reverent. "I wanted you to have a night that belongs only to you." Celia looked around. The scent of honeysuckle mingled with the warm spice of whatever was cooking. The air was cool, but not cold, and everything about the place felt like it had been pulled from a dream she hadn't dared to admit she had. "Why me?" she asked, her voice low. Lachlan walked toward her, slow and deliberate. "Because you don't ask for anything. And because I think you deserve everything." She inhaled sharply. They sat. Dinner was delicate and inventive: saffron-laced risotto, roasted figs with honey and balsamic, a chilled pear soup that tasted like summer. But what struck her most was the way he watched her, like every reaction she had mattered. "I have a question," she said, setting down her fork. "You said you don't usually live like this. But this," she gestured to the table, the lights, the secluded garden hidden behind a wrought iron gate. "This is very specific. It's not something you come up with overnight." He folded his hands. "You're right." She waited. "I used to plan evenings like this for someone else," he said. "A long time ago." Her stomach dipped. He didn't look away. "Before everything with my company exploded, before my name was in magazines, there was someone I thought I'd spend my life with. She didn't want the world I was building, said it made me hard, distracted, cold." Celia didn't speak. She let him continue. "She left before I realized she was right." The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. "She didn't want the world you have now," Celia said slowly. "And I'm guessing most women only want the world, not the man." He met her eyes. "You see more than most do." "I look at people for a living," she said. "But sometimes I think I'm better at art than real ones." He leaned forward. "You're wrong," she swallowed. "I don't know how to do this, Lachlan. I don't know how to be with someone like you without feeling like I'm stepping into a life that doesn't belong to me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small. A sketch. He laid it between them. It was her. Laughing, head tilted slightly, one hand tugging a curtain of hair behind her ear. "This is what belongs to me," he said softly. "Not the money, not the buildings. You." She stared at the drawing for a long time, her throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." They sat in silence again, the wind rustling the branches above. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her chest for days. "Why now?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Because I've spent years surrounding myself with everything I thought I wanted. And then I met someone who forgot her passport and smiled anyway, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone made me want to stop the world just to hear them laugh." Celia couldn't breathe. He stood and held out his hand. She rose slowly, placing her fingers in his. He led her to a small clearing just beyond the table. A string quartet waited at the edge of the garden. The music shifted. He pulled her into his arms and they began to dance. She wasn't a dancer. He clearly was. But he held her close enough that she forgot her feet, forgot the world, forgot everything except the steady rhythm of him and the music, and the way his palm fit perfectly against the small of her back. "I'm scared," she whispered into his shoulder. "So am I," he replied. She leaned back to look at him. "You don't seem scared." "That's because I've learned to move through fear. But this," he touched her cheek, "this is a different kind." "What kind?" "The kind that could change everything." She didn't argue because she felt it too. They danced until the quartet packed up, until the stars came out, until the candles flickered low and the wind began to carry the scent of rain. And when he walked her back to the car, he didn't kiss her. He pressed her hand gently and said, "Next time I want to show you where I grew up." Celia blinked. "You mean like a childhood home?" He nodded. "If I'm going to ask you to be part of my world, then you should see where it started." Her chest tightened. "That sounds serious." "It is." She climbed into the car. As the door closed, she turned and looked at him through the glass, and for the first time she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a dream she'd wake from, because Lachlan Kane didn't just want to win her heart. He wanted to give her his. The private jet touched down just after dusk, the sky a deep indigo behind the silhouette of distant mountains. Celia stepped onto the tarmac, the breeze cool and scented faintly of pine and early spring. She hadn't known what to expect when Lachlan said he was flying her to Montana to see where he grew up. But this wide open sky, the hush of wilderness just beyond the runway, was not what she imagined. Lachlan waited at the bottom of the steps. He held out his hand, not as a gesture of formality but something quieter, steadier. "I forgot how good the air smells here," he said. Celia glanced around, her heels clicking softly on the concrete. "It doesn't feel like you belong here." He looked out toward the hills. "That's the thing." "I didn't." A black SUV was already waiting. The drive was long, winding through gravel roads and past farms tucked into valleys, their wooden fences bent by time. The sun dropped lower as they climbed toward the mountains, and Celia sat in silence, watching Lachlan's profile in the fading light. They didn't speak again until the house appeared, a modest cabin tucked into a clearing, its porch light glowing faintly. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished. It was worn at the edges, like something that had endured more than it should have. He didn't say anything as they stepped inside. The interior was simple: stone fireplace, sagging sofa, faded photographs in mismatched frames. Celia walked toward the mantel, her eyes catching on a picture Lachlan at maybe 17, standing beside a woman with dark hair and a tired smile. Her arm wrapped loosely around his shoulders. "My mother," he said from behind her. "She looks kind." She was. Until she couldn't afford to be any more, Celia turned. "After my father died, she started working nights at the mill. I stopped asking for things when I realized everything cost her something." He stepped past her and picked up a small wooden box from the shelf. He opened it and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "She wrote this the day I left for college. Said it was the only thing she could give me that wouldn't break or wear out. I've kept it ever since." He handed it to her. Celia unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was uneven, the ink slightly faded. It was short, just a few lines about believing in him, about remembering where he came from, about not letting money change his heart. "She never saw what I built," he said. "She died the year before the company went public." Celia didn't speak. She just reached for his hand. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward the hallway. "There's something else." They passed a closed door. He paused before opening it. Inside was a room that looked untouched. A small bed, a bookshelf lined with cracked spines, a desk scarred with years of writing and carving. She glanced at the wall. Pencil markings tracked growth, initials scrawled beside dates. "I spent years trying to forget this place," he said. "Now I think it's the only part of me that still feels real." Celia stepped into the room and touched the edge of the desk. "You brought me here for a reason." "I brought you here because I needed you to see all of it, not the jet, not the penthouse. This." She turned to face him. "You think I care about any of that, I think," he said slowly. "You scare me," she blinked. "Why?" "Because you're the first person I haven't been able to buy, impress, or outmaneuver." He took a breath. "And the only person I've let all the way in." She said nothing for a moment. "Then you think I'm going to hurt you?" "I think," he said, "you already could." She stepped toward him, close enough to feel the shift in his breath. "I'm not going anywhere. You say that now. I mean it." He exhaled sharply, some part of him cracking open. "Then come with me tomorrow. There's one more place I want to show you." The next morning, they hiked. Celia hadn't packed for it, but Lachlan handed her a pair of worn boots and a jacket that smelled vaguely of cedar. They walked in silence at first, the trail winding through trees heavy with dew. The mountain rose gradually ahead, the path narrowing as they climbed. An hour later, they reached a clearing. There was no bench, no marker, just a flat stretch of earth overlooking a valley that stretched for miles. Below, a river wound like silver ribbon through the trees. "This is where I made the decision," he said. She glanced at him. "To leave, to build something bigger than this place. I used to come here when I needed to remember why." He sat, legs stretched in front of him, arms resting on his knees. "I thought if I had enough money, I could fix everything. Make it so nobody ever had to work themselves into the ground the way she did. But the more I earned, the lonelier it got." Celia sat beside him. "And now," he said, "I think all I wanted was someone to sit here with me." She leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. "You found her." He turned slowly, his voice low. "I know." They stayed like that for a long time, the wind brushing through the trees, the sun warming their faces. No rush, no noise, just the sound of the world exhaling around them. When they flew back the next day, Lachlan didn't take her home. He brought her to a rooftop in Tribeca. Not his, not hers. Just a quiet, open space where candlelight flickered across a table set for two, but this time there was no music, no waitstaff, just them. He stood as the last sliver of sun dipped beneath the skyline. "I've built empires," he said. "I've bought companies, cities, even silence, but I've never had someone look at me the way you do." Celia's heart thudded. "You never asked for anything, not once, not even when I gave you reasons to. You just showed up, fully, honestly." He reached for something in his pocket. Her breath caught. It wasn't a ring, it was her passport, the original one. She frowned. "You already gave it back." "This isn't the one from the airport," he said. "This is the one you left in the cab." She blinked. "I tracked down the driver," he explained. "The day I found the other one, I realized something didn't add up. Turns out you had two. This one's expired. You must have grabbed the wrong one and didn't notice." She stared at it, realization dawning. "I kept it," he said. "Because I knew I needed a reason to find you again." She laughed, a soft, stunned sound. "You already had my name." "I needed an excuse," he said. "Because I'd looked at you for 10 seconds and already knew I wasn't walking away." She stepped closer. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove something," he said. "But with you, I don't have to prove anything, I just have to be." She reached for the passport in his hand, but he held on. "Celia Summers," he said quietly. "I don't want a future that doesn't have you in it." Her eyes filled. He pressed the passport into her hand. "Come with me, not just for a weekend, for the rest of it." She didn't answer. She kissed him, the kind of kiss that stopped time. That rewrote everything. When they finally pulled apart, she looked him in the eye. "I never needed a passport to find where I belong," she said. "I just needed you." 6 months later, the gallery hosted a private exhibit. Her name was on the wall beside the title in gold lettering. Every piece was from a private collection, all sketches, all of her. At the center, beneath the final frame, stood Lachlan. No suit, no pretense. Just the man who had once sat on a mountain and dreamed of more, and beside him Celia, not as a visitor, not as a guest, but as the woman who had lost her passport and found everything she didn't know she was missing. It was raining by the time Celia stepped out of the town car in front of the towering glass lobby. Not a soft drizzle, but a furious downpour, the kind that turned the city into a blur of silver reflections. She had no umbrella, no jacket, and no time to care. Her heels hit the pavement as she ran for the entrance, soaked within seconds, her pulse thundering louder than the storm. The doorman reached for the handle, but she pushed through on her own, dripping and breathless. "Is he here?" she asked the concierge, who blinked at her in surprise. "Yes, Miss Summers." He just returned from, but she was already moving toward the elevator, heart hammering. At the top floor, she didn't wait to be announced. She stepped into Lachlan's penthouse, the same one that had once felt like a palace and now felt like the only place she could breathe. He was standing near the fireplace, jacket tossed over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up, phone in hand. He looked up the moment the elevator doors parted. "Celia," he said, voice low, startled. "I need to say something," she said, not waiting for him to speak again. "And I'm not leaving until I do." He set the phone down slowly. "All right." She stepped forward, water still dripping from her hem, hair plastered to her neck. "I got scared," she said. "Not because of who you are or what you have, but because I've spent my whole life believing that anything too good couldn't last. And then you showed up and proved me wrong." He didn't move, didn't interrupt. "I thought if I kept some distance, I could protect myself. But all I did was waste time pretending I didn't already belong to you." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I want all of it," she continued. "The dinners, the silence, the hard days, the messy ones. I want the way you see the world and the way you see me. I want to build something that doesn't feel like a fairy tale, something real." She took a breath that trembled at the edges. "I love you." The words hung there for a moment, fragile and bold and absolute. Then Lachlan crossed the room. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not tentative, not questioning, certain. When they finally parted, his hands still on her waist, he looked down at her like she was the only thing tethering him to the earth. "I've waited my entire life for the moment you'd say that." Her laugh was soft and wet and laced with disbelief. "I'm soaked. You're perfect." She leaned into him, the storm outside crashing against the windows. He pulled back just enough to look at her fully. "There's something I've been carrying around for weeks. I didn't know when the right moment would come, but I think it's now." She blinked. He reached into the pocket of his slacks and pulled out a small, deep blue velvet box. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't showy. It was elegant, simple, and steady, just like him. Celia's breath caught. "I didn't buy this because I thought you'd say yes," he said. "I bought it because I couldn't imagine not asking." He dropped to one knee, the room went still. "I want to wake up beside you every morning, whether we're in New York or the middle of nowhere. I want to argue about paint colors and burn toast and hold your hand in every version of our lives. I want to build something better than anything I've ever owned. I want a life with you, Celia. Will you marry me?" She covered her mouth, her heart breaking open in the best way. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a delicate band of white gold with a single, brilliant sapphire flanked by two smaller diamonds. It was stunning, but not loud. It looked like it had always belonged there. He stood and kissed her again, this time laughing into it, pulling her close until she could feel every beat of his heart against hers. They didn't sleep that night. They stayed up on the balcony, barefoot and wrapped in blankets, watching the storm pass. He told her stories he'd never shared, about the first painting he ever sold, about the night he nearly walked away from it all. She told him about the first time she saw her mother cry, and the day she realized art wasn't just something to look at, it was how she made sense of the world. By morning, the sky was clear. They watched the sun rise over the city, fingers entwined, a quiet certainty between them that no storm could ever shake. 1 year later, the wedding was held in a greenhouse overlooking Lake Como. Not because it was famous or expensive, but because the first time Celia walked into it during a trip with Lachlan, she said it felt like stepping into a secret, and Lachlan had whispered then and there, This is where I want to marry you." The ceremony was small, just 27 people. No press, no spectacle. She wore a gown with hand-painted flowers skimming the hem, and he wore a suit with a single orchid pinned to the lapel, the same kind he'd sent her that night outside the gallery. When they exchanged vows, there were no grand declarations. Just two people who had found something rare and refused to let it go. Lachlan's voice was steady as he held both her hands. "You gave me back the part of myself I forgot how to recognize. With you, I'm not Lachlan Kane. I'm just a man in love with his best friend." Celia's eyes shimmered as she spoke. "You made me believe in things I'd written off as fantasy. You reminded me that love isn't about fairy tales, it's about showing up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." They kissed beneath a ceiling of glass and stars. Later, as the music played and candles flickered against the glass, Celia pulled Lachlan onto the dance floor. He wrapped his arms around her, and she rested her head against his chest. "This doesn't feel real," she whispered. "It's the most real thing I've ever known." They danced until the candles guttered low, until the guests had said their goodbyes and the staff had packed away the last of the wine glasses. And then they disappeared into a villa tucked into the hillside, where the windows opened to moonlight and warm wind. He carried her across the threshold, not because tradition demanded it, but because he couldn't stop holding her. That night, they didn't make promises, they lived them. Years later, Celia stood in the backyard of a house overlooking the sea, her bare feet in the grass, a sketchbook in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the garden they'd planted together. Lachlan stepped out from the patio, a toddler balanced on his hip, her hair the same coppery gold as Celia's. "Mommy, look," the little girl said, holding up a lopsided drawing of a tree and a house. Celia crouched down beside her. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." "Is that our house?" The girl nodded proudly. Lachlan kissed the top of his daughter's head. "She's got your eye for detail." "And your stubbornness," Celia said, grinning. He reached for her hand and pulled her close. They stood there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, the scent of lavender drifting through the air, the waves a soft rhythm in the distance. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and in every way that mattered, it was more than enough.